Folks not only in Chester, in the Chester area, but geez, around the country are joining us this evening, Angie, and we are most delighted to have you especially. I know you grew up in Ellis Grove and you went to Chester schools, but shall we start that way, Angie, with some of your memories growing up in the Chester area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I first wanted to talk about my relationship with the Chester Library because it's really special for me. I loved going to the library when I was little, and I remember going to story hours there, where Colette Polly would come as Coco the Clown and do storytelling. I mean, being able to go to the library and get I think I maxed out as many books as I possibly could. That I could check out at one time. And I just loved going through them all. And it was just so great. I mean, you walk in that building and you get hit with that smell of the library, of the books, right? That it's just unmistakable. And that's something that's always been really special to me. So I want to thank you for hosting this and for asking me to be a part of it. I'm just really, really honored to be here and reconnect with so many people. So, just to sort of give you all a little Reader's Digest version of my musical journey and my origin story, I remember being at Linda Schaefer's daycare center and playing on her piano. And I believe that's when she said to my parents one day, I think you should get her piano lessons. And so I started taking piano lessons when I was 5 or 6, I think. I can't remember. Mom, you'll have to tell me. But I started taking piano lessons with Linda Roth when I was about 5 or so, and studied with her through high school, and also got to experience choir at St. John Lutheran School with Connie Mattingly at first, and then moving up as in the upper grades with Richard Jansen. And then we actually became collaborators with weddings and services and things like that, even after I graduated from St. John's and was going to high school. And I also had great band directors when I joined the band with the collaboration through the Chester Grade School. Back, I think I had Keith Fothery for a year or so, and Michael Sauerhaig came through. And then Steve Colonel, if you're out there, you're responsible. And Jane Cruzy, whenever I got to high school choir. God bless you both for putting up with me, because I know I had a lot of opinions and rebellious teenagers we should do it this way and da, da, da. I don't think I've played as many instruments as I did when I was playing for Steve Colonel, because I think I played the flute and the piccolo as well as the euphonium, and then the synthesizer and the pep band, and also some percussion. I think I strapped on a glockenspiel at one point. You got to do it. Summer times I would play the flute in the Muni Band, first under the direction of John Birchler. And that was a very memorable experience, and I'm so glad I got to work with him. And then I can't remember, Mr. Colonel, if you took over before or after I left. I can't remember. But yeah, I remember coming and playing in the Muni Band in the summer times, and it was just great. Playing out in front of the KC Hall at the Popeye Picnic, which I just saw was canceled this year. That's so heartbreaking. So after I graduated from high school, I started my undergrad at Valparaiso University in Northwest Indiana, just outside of Chicago, and got a bachelor's of music education there. I started out and I told myself I was going to be a high school choir director because, being a full-time performer, that's so unpredictable. I couldn't bear to do that. How could anybody possibly do that? But after I did student teaching, I realized, I don't know if that's the right place for me to teach. I love teaching, but I don't know if that's where I want to spend all my time. So that was kind of an internal journey that I had to take, trying to figure out, okay, well, if I don't want to be a full-time performer and I don't want to be, a high school choir director or sort of a full-time classroom teacher, then what do I do? Because there honestly wasn't a lot of discussion, outside of like being an audio engineer or something like that. At that time, like what other options there were. I had no idea just how many possibilities there were. So I did graduate from Valpo with a music ed degree. Got married a month after I graduated to Pete Smucker. And we sort of took some interim years. He was teaching in Northeast Indiana at Angola Middle School and High School. And so he taught there for 2 years. And then we both decided that we wanted to go back to school. And we agreed that he would apply first, because his field is a little more specialized than mine. Mine has a little more flexibility in terms of where I could go and who I could study with. So we ended up choosing University of Minnesota. And so we lived in the Twin Cities for 3 years. And I have to say, it's very heartbreaking to see what's going on in Minneapolis right now, because that all started in the neighborhood where we lived. And it's a beautiful, wonderful neighborhood. So it's a little tough seeing that going on right now, but we loved our time in Minnesota. And we both graduated with master's degrees. He got a master's in music theory, so he's very much on the analytical side of music. His father was a mathematics professor, so he has that analytical brain that I am very happy he has it. And I graduated with a Master of Music degree in vocal performance. And so I was focusing on, developing my vocal technique and developing repertoire. And I performed in some opera, and I performed in some oratorio concert work. This was all new to me, sort of taking up these solo things. And I had done some of that in undergrad, but never thought like, I don't know that that's the sole thing that I wanted to do. I still didn't have kind of an idea. And I'll pause here for 1 second, because yes, Mom, I did Lutheran summer music in the summers while I was in high school. That was a big deal for me, because that actually prepped me for going to college. I was on a college campus for a month during the summer with other high school students. And, we learned a lot. We learned how to be in charge of ourselves and be on that schedule, and, get used to dorm life and, the student union and the cafeteria and all that stuff. And it was a great learning experience. And I'm so thankful for that. And I do remember the St. John's Church actually helped sponsor me, I think at least 1 year to attend. So I'm still very grateful for that. But getting back to moving around. So we were in Minneapolis for 3 years, both graduated. And yes, okay, yes, Mom, she's prompting me. I'm forgetting all the things. I was, y'all didn't know, like, I've got a manager on the back end of this. She's taking care of me. I was also the organist and choir director at Peace Lutheran Church in Chester for a short time when I was in high school. So that was when I got a lot of use out of my organ shoes, which I no longer have, but definitely have great respect for. So Mom, I'm going to fast forward. If there's anything else, you let me know. So after being in the Twin Cities, my husband had applied to doctoral programs in music theory. Because his ultimate goal was to teach at a university. And in order to do that, you really have to have your terminal degree, so your final degree. And so that meant that he needed to get his PhD. And he got into the University of Chicago, which is unbelievable, highly competitive, one of the, top 10, 11 schools in the country. And he got in, and we were so excited. And we were particularly excited to move to Chicago and back to, you know, a familiar area. We still had lots of friends there. We were still close to Valpo and still connected with our faculty that we had studied with and our advisors there and our mentors. It was really wonderful. So we moved to Chicago, and I started just trying to figure things out for myself. You know, he was a full-time student, and so I was trying to figure out what I could do for work. So, you know, I did all sorts of things. I was a barista in a Borders bookstore coffee shop. It was in Barack Obama's former neighborhood, which is where we lived, and it was right across the street from the newsstand that he used to go to. We shared the same dry cleaner. I had no idea. But, but they do great alterations. It was fantastic. So I was, you know, I was slinging coffee, and then I was working for a friend of mine who was responsible for like apartment leases and a property management office, working part-time doing that. I was working, I was a paid member of a church choir at an Episcopal church in Chicago. So I had, you know, a church gig every Sunday morning where you show up, you rehearse the music, you sing the service, and then you're done. Very much needing all of those musical skills that I had worked on in my undergrad and high school and in graduate school. So you had to be able to read music very quickly and process it, and then, you know, make some art out of it, all in just a few hours. I worked at that particular church for about 5 years. And during that time, I also became a member of the Chicago Symphony Chorus. I sang with the Grant Park Music Festival Chorus in the summer, which is the big downtown festival at Millennium Park, where you see that big metal pavilion downtown. One of the best jobs ever. I'm really missing that one this summer in particular. But so let's see. We moved to Chicago. I'm starting to freelance. I got my very first professional traveling gig in 2006 with the Santa Fe Desert Chorale. And so I went out there, and they, you know, they fly you out there and they host you in a home. Usually a local host will provide a space for you. Either, you know, sometimes they have guest houses, which is really nice, or, you know, they have a guest room that you stay in. And I was out there for 2 months. Away from my husband while he's back in Chicago. Or actually, that was right before. We were still in Minnesota. It was right before we moved. But I was there doing that gig and performing for 2 months in Santa Fe. And then I went straight from there to Germany for a month to do a program there. And so I was on the road for 3 months, and we quickly realized that's not what we wanted. So we, you know, we had a little come to Jesus with ourselves and figured out, like, in terms of traveling, what worked for us. But yeah, you know, during that time, you learn how small this world is, and particularly, you know, whenever you start to focus in on whatever field you're in, you just start connecting with all sorts of people. That first gig that I had in 2006 actually helped build the rest of my performance career. And so I did what I could to supplement that. You know, I would teach voice lessons out of my home in Chicago. I had an adjunct instructor position at Valparaiso University. I taught there for 7 years, teaching voice, and I directed a choir for a little bit. I gave seminars and lectures for our voice colloquium, and really enjoyed it. And I found out how much I really loved teaching in that format. I love studio teaching. Now, since then, I've come to learn how I do classroom teaching. Actually, right now I'm teaching a course through Stetson University here in Central Florida, a summer course that's part of the music curriculum here. It's a required class for all their junior and senior music majors, and it's called Career Skills for the Entrepreneurial Musician. And it is like my dream. This is the kind of class I wish I would have had, you know, 20, 25 years ago. You know, it's a class geared toward learning just basic skills, like the stuff that they think you'll figure out that you sort of stumble into, like, oh, I have to think about contracts and negotiating that. And I also have to think about managing, you know, my budget and my variable income. I mean, all these super exciting things that are the glamorous part of working in the music business. And you know, I sort of took it on as part of my personal mission to share that information with my students in my studio practice and in the voice department where I worked. And I also give seminars doing that too, with other schools. But I love that it's part of the curriculum here. And so I'm a real fan of that. I'm sort of bouncing around here, but yeah, I'm going to fast forward several years. So after my husband completed his PhD at University of Chicago in 2015, he was hired here at Stetson University in DeLand, Florida. We're about an hour north of Orlando. I had never heard of this place until Pete was looking for a job. And I was like, really? Florida? We're moving to Florida. Okay. I said, as long as I can get to an airport, I'm okay. So we moved down here in 2015. And since he had finished his formal schooling and was now, you know, focused on creating a career here at Stetson, I decided, okay, it's my turn. I want to get my terminal degree because there's a chance that I may want to apply for a full-time position at a college or a university. And again, in this day and age, they really require you to have that terminal degree. So I applied to doctoral programs around the country, and I got into a few and decided to accept the offer from Northwestern University. And so I am still currently enrolled as a doctoral student. But it was a really special a special event for me. One, because I never ever thought I would try to get a doctorate. And just so you know, there are two different kinds of doctorates when it comes to music. There is a PhD, which is what my husband has, and he has a PhD in music theory and history. Sounds very. And then there's also a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts. That is for your performance-based track. So like a singer or an instrumentalist or a conductor even. Composers, sometimes they fall in the DMA program or a PhD program, just depends on the institution. But if anybody asks me if I'm working on my PhD, I say absolutely not, because I'm not that smart. There's a lot of research and writing that goes with that. And I've seen how much work it takes. I'm not doing that kind of doctorate. But I got into Northwestern and I started my coursework there in 2016. But as part of that program, they require you to be in residence for 2 years while you're doing your coursework. So that meant that my husband and I had to live apart for 2 years. So we had like a commuter marriage. I would try and come down to Florida once a month to see him. And sometimes it was 2 months before I could come down, depending on, you know, what my course schedule was like. And I was still performing and traveling. And I had to get special waivers from the university in order to keep up those contracts and do that. But we knew it was temporary. And so, you know, our philosophy is you need to do what you need to do in order to get where you want to be. So that's what we did. And it was not easy. It was absolutely not easy, those 2 years, because at the same time, I also started a nonprofit music organization in Chicago. So I highly recommend, do not do what I do. Start a doctorate, start a nonprofit, live 1,000 miles away from your spouse. It's not a great combo. There are other combinations that I can highly recommend. That's not one of them. But it was the right time to do it. And I'm really happy that I did. And that group is called Third Coast Baroque, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so that kind of brings us up to where we are. I finished my coursework in 2018 and sort of moved back down to Florida, moved back in with my husband. It was great. And so I've been working on studying for, you know, my comprehensive exams that I have left. I have a final project, which is a lecture recital and a short document that I have to write that goes with it. So I have, you know, a few large things left in my program, and I had planned on graduating this month, but because of the way things are and the nature of my project, it just was not possible. So the goal is to graduate in December and have 2 Dr. Smuckers in the house. So, so that's kind of where we are. But, you know, none of this would have happened if I did not have the musical opportunities and the encouragement of the people that I named earlier in Chester, and who pointed me in the right direction, and introduced me to the right kind of people, and so many people. And so I'm very grateful for that.
That's wonderful. So I guess now you need to tell us about all these exciting opportunities you've had in all these wonderful places, Angie.
Yeah, so you know what? I've got a little more to share with you. So I'm gonna try sharing my screen again. This was an incredible sort of bucket list opportunity that I had. As I mentioned, I sang with the Chicago Symphony Chorus, and let me see if I can use this little pointer here. Oh yes, ta-da! Can you see my little pointer? Little red dot?
Yes, I can.
Great. So all of these folks up here are members of the Chicago Symphony Chorus. And of course, we've got the Chicago Symphony Orchestra here. And this was a very special performance conducted by this man, Helmut Rilling. This is him shaking my hand down here. This was a performance of Felix Mendelssohn's Elijah, which is an oratorio, and it's the story of Elijah. If you remember the Bible story about Elijah competing against the other prophets with the altars and all of that stuff, and he's like taunting them, and it's an incredible piece of music. But my colleague Melissa and I we auditioned for some small solo roles that are in that piece, and we got the opportunity to go up to the front of the stage and sing with the big kids, as I call them. And actually they literally were big kids. The 2 female soloists were like a foot taller than both of us, and we're both like 5'3", 5'4". But this was a wonderful, just a really wonderful memory of mine, to sing with Helmut Rilling as the person who sort of solidified my love for J.S. Bach and really opened my eyes to just how incredible J.S. Bach's music is, and how much there is to unpack with that. So that was just a wonderful, wonderful moment. And yeah, so another great memory was when the entire Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Chorus went to Carnegie Hall. And I was very fortunate to join them twice. We went there twice, and I can't remember with this performance. One of the performances was actually the opening of the season for Carnegie Hall. And so people like Francis Ford Coppola were there. The mayor of New York was there. Like all of these celebrities were there. And you were so close to see them in these boxes here. It was just incredible. But you can see how tightly we're packed there on stage. And there I am, my little head over there. When we were in rehearsal on stage, one of the gentlemen got sick in rehearsal. I mean, he turned green. And because of the way the stage is set up, the only way to get off stage was for him to go through the entire chorus and exit through these double doors on the left side of the stage. We had to stop rehearsal completely. We took a 20-minute break just so he could get off the stage. I felt so bad for him, but it was just, I mean, Carnegie Hall is incredible, but it is a very old building, and it has its shortcomings. It's amazing. Although I have to tell you about this one brush with celebrity while I was there. One of the performances we had, right before the show, a whole bunch of the chorus members were loading onto, it was essentially like a service elevator, to take down from like the 5th floor of the building down to the backstage entrance so we could get on stage before the show. A whole bunch of my colleagues were already on the elevator, and I hopped on right before the doors closed, and I noticed they were all looking at one person in the elevator. And I was just sort of like so in my head and like, do I have my folder? I have everything. Am I okay? I've got my music. All right, here we go. And then I finally look over and I realize it's Marilyn Horne. She's one of the most incredible opera singers in history, and a mezzo soprano at that, which is my voice part. And I was in shock. I literally stared a hole in her head, saying nothing. And she finally turns to me and just says, hello. I'm like, hi, you're Marilyn Horne. This is beauty and grace. Just, I don't see how it could be anything better. So there's my brush with greatness. I wanted to share one more special memory with the Chicago Symphony Chorus. In 2011, I believe, we had the opportunity to record a movie soundtrack, and everything was very hush-hush, and they didn't tell us what the movie was until we got into the rehearsal and the recording session. And we found out it was for Lincoln, directed by Steven Spielberg and conducted by John Williams. And so I'm sure some of you have seen the movie and you know that it's the Chicago Symphony Chorus and Orchestra. And it was recorded in Symphony Center, the pictures that I showed you before. It was recorded there, and it was just the most like surreal 3 hours of my life. We didn't have a whole lot in the movie. I think we had 2, maybe 3 tracks, and they were very short. John Williams was amazing, just incredible. Very collegial, very kind, and very, very straightforward. It was when you're doing that kind of work, the conductor is watching a monitor, and it has a click track that goes by, and more people are getting familiar with this whole concept of click tracks and recordings with the pandemic and how we're virtually making music right now. But he was standing on the podium with this monitor in front of him with the click track going by and conducting to that. And we did the things, and he would ask for a little more or ask for that, and we would do it. And he was very pleased. And about halfway through our recording session, I noticed out in the audience in the house, it's empty, I noticed somebody had come in from the lobby and then through the doors into the concert hall, into the audience area. And he had a camcorder and just this goofy grin on his face. I'm like, who is this guy? And it was Steven Spielberg. I'm like, okay, I guess this is where we are, and this is what's happening right now, and this is my job at this moment. It's unbelievable. So it's it was a really incredible time, and again, that was another bucket list experience for me. But I actually want to back up a little bit, because one of the big things that's become a part of my life, both on and off stage, is Baroque music. And I just want to take a second to talk about what that means. And some of you may know. I know my parents hear a lot about it. But Baroque music is specifically for music that was written in what we call the long 17th century. So anywhere from around 1600 to about 1750. And 1750 is when J.S. Bach died. So these are composers like George Friedrich Handel, J.S. Bach, Antonio Vivaldi, Philip Telemann, Claudio Monteverdi. He's sort of like the end of the Renaissance and into the Baroque era. So those kinds, the heavy hitters, if you will. And growing up in a Lutheran church, I mean, Bach he's there, whether you know it or not. The musical era, it was all about new music, new compositions. And so all of these things that we listen to now as classical music and as standards, like they would not have, in the church, they would not have looked back. they would have been asking for new music. Bach would write a new cantata every week, 20 to 30 or more minutes of music every week. And so these composers, first of all, learned how to be very efficient, and they would borrow from themselves. So if you start to listen to a lot of Bach's repertoire, you'll start to hear things that are reused. Like there's an aria in Bach's B minor Mass that was originally from a church cantata, and he used that. The B minor Mass is sort of like his ultimate compendium of showcasing all of his work, and it's just glorious. But the thing about Baroque music is that it comes from a time in world history where culture, art, science, all of these thought processes, philosophy, it was an incredibly rich time. The printing press was going full bore, and printed music was just starting to fly around Europe. And in terms of Western classical music that we know and we think of, just the exchange of ideas, they were really starting to fire. And so people were exploring new styles from places they never would have considered. And what's really incredible about that time is a lot of the musical building blocks that we know of, in terms of harmonies and voice leading and harmonic progressions and things like that, they really became solidified. If you ask my music theorist husband, Bach is used as the example for teaching harmonic voice leading and how you arrange all of those chord members in hymns. So it's an incredibly rich time, and incredibly it's igniting a lot of new things. And so when we think about the Baroque era, it's like, yeah, that was centuries ago, powdered wigs, the whole bit. Oh, there's so much more. There's so much more. And I didn't realize that until I went to college and I started singing Bach motets, which are incredibly technically difficult. And so that really challenged my technique and my vocal athletic ability, and I just loved it. And then I sang my very first St. Matthew Passion under the direction of Helmut Rilling, who I pointed out earlier, and it changed my life. It was a turning point for me, that I realized, oh my gosh, there's so much in this music and there's so much to communicate. So in 2008, I was given the opportunity to be a soloist with my very first historically informed Baroque ensemble. And what that means is that a historically informed performance uses instruments that are either replicas or actual instruments from that time period. So the instruments you hear played at like Powell Symphony Hall or Chicago Symphony Center, those are modern string instruments, modern brass instruments, modern woodwind instruments. If you go back to the 1600s and the 1700s, even in the 1800s still, the way that the instruments were constructed were different. You look at the harpsichord, that is sort of a progression toward the piano. A harpsichord is much quieter. It doesn't have the same amount of sustain as a piano does. It's plucking strings instead of hammering them, right? A violin from the Baroque era is different. It uses, the body of it is slightly different. It's a little leaner. The strings are made from animal gut, not metal or vinyl. And the bow is also shaped differently. So if you go to what we call a period performance by a period ensemble, look closely and go up to the musicians during intermission or after the performance and ask if they can show you their instrument, because they love to talk about their instruments. They love to talk about their instruments. It's fantastic. But there are certain techniques that are used in historically informed practice. And so I got this call in 2008 to be a soloist for a Bach B minor Mass. And I was so nervous. I didn't know as a singer, you know, there was this stereotype that, well, Baroque singers don't sing with vibrato. And I, you know, when I was a freshman in college, I was like, I don't like vibrato because I've heard too much of it wobbling around and it didn't sound good. And I'm like, I don't want to sing like that. But then I learned vibrato, you know, vibrato of a particular size and a particular shape is a sign of a healthy voice. It's a sign of a free voice. But it's also a very controversial topic in period singing. So I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole other evening. Oh my gosh. And so I had this first gig and I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to sing with straight tone with no vibrato? And what am I supposed to do about ornamentation? Am I supposed to make up my own ornamentation for this? Because that's also a practice in historically informed performance. I was like freaking out. But I went to San Diego and sang with the Bach Collegium San Diego in 2008. And it was, again, another game changer for me. I met people in that first gig that I'm still friends with. I still sing out there. It's been over 10 years now, and I continue to go out there at least once a season for a performance. And I've learned so much. I've learned so much performing with these folks. And actually, since this is paused, I want to point out, if you can see this bow here on the left of your screen, you'll see it's rounded like an archer's bow more than a modern bow. A modern bow usually has a dip in it. It curves the other way. And so these are little differences with the instruments. You can see there's a harpsichord over here, but for some reason, it's a style of music that it's challenging. At first listen, you know, it can all sort of sound the same, but I would challenge us to think that there are all sorts of genres that if you just listen to the whole one genre, it's all going to start to sound the same. But it's incredibly technically challenging at times. Bach wrote his music and didn't care if his singers breathed or not. And he was also writing for children. I mean, these were pieces that he was writing for these schoolboys, for a boy choir. And that you hear these things and you're like, how in the world could a child sing this? It's unbelievable. But one of the things that you get to sing a lot when you're a Baroque singer or any singer, in December, you get a lot of messiahs. That's sort of the bread and butter. That's the hot time of the year for musicians. You got, I think one year I sang 10 or 11 messiahs in the month of December in like 4 or 5 different places. So it was great. This was my most recent messiah out in San Diego this past December. And what was really special about this one was all of the solo movements that I sang. I sang both in the chorus and as a soloist, which is also a common practice in Baroque ensembles. All of the solo movements that I sang were not originally given to an alto soloist or a mezzo-soprano. The one that you're about to hear was originally, is originally for a bass baritone. Of course, I sang it in my own octave. I had 2 movements that were written for tenor. I also sang a part that was originally written for a soprano, and then I sang alto in the chorus. So just like high school band with Mr. Colonel, I was kind of doing as much as I could. But I'm going to play a bit of this for you, just the first part of this, before my colleague Jay Carter comes in. Actually, I'm going to play a little bit for you of Jay. Jay is also actually a Midwestern Southern Illinoisan guy. And we've become good friends. He is a countertenor. And if you haven't heard of a countertenor, that is a male singer who is singing in my range, in the mezzo-soprano or alto range, and basically has a very developed and refined falsetto. And so I'll let you hear a little bit of him, but here we go.
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, that once a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land, and I
So that's Jay, another homegrown goodie. Oh my gosh, he's fantastic. So he's actually singing a piece that was written for a boy soprano or a countertenor. At that time, they would likely have been a castrato. Um, um, but yes, so he's singing a part that is actually written for him. And I know I've been talking a long time, so I'm gonna keep going. And show you some pictures of some opera work that I've done. This is another part of my Baroque period performance. So Haymarket Opera Company was founded in Chicago in 2011, and my friend Craig Trumpeter came to me in 2010 and asked if I would be a part of it in the very first performance. And this top picture here on the left was our first performance. It was a Handel cantata, and you can see all these fun costumes down here right below. This was a show called Dido and Aeneas, and I was playing the role of a sorceress and had this wonderful, wonderful wig. It was like the little hocus pocus, forgive me, I call it the butt crack wig because it's just like two humps. This one in the middle is one of my favorites. I was playing a pants role, so I was playing what was a male character, and that's my puppy. That's my pupper Peanut. He's actually here quietly asleep, thank goodness. His black fur has gotten white over the years, but he was on stage with me. He's smart, almost too smart for his own good. And so we trained him to get some cues, and I think he got better reviews than I did. I don't know. And then this was this other one was an opera called Actéon. It was a French Baroque piece, and I was one of Diana's water nymphs. So it's all this mythological stuff. This was one of my most challenging but favorite roles. This was a show called Callisto, and I was playing. For some reason, first of all, in Haymarket, they give me a bow and arrow all the time, and I have to shoot it in the show. Now, I was in the Bullseye Club and Girl Scout camp.
Few years
just a few years ago, Camp Cedar Point, you know. So I know how to shoot a bow and arrow when I was 10. But it did come in handy on stage. But these costumes, I mean, look at these things. There's just tons and tons of stuff. And this was funny because I was playing a character I was playing two characters. The first character I was playing was a god who took the form of this goddess. And I was also playing the goddess that he was impersonating. So it was all sorts of crazy. So I was a man playing a woman and a woman playing a woman. And I was a woman playing a man playing a woman, you know, as you do. So here's a little peek backstage of the before and after with costume and makeup.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. My friend Miriam Bowery, she's been with Haymarket Opera since the very beginning as the costumer, and she built all of these things. And again, they give me weapons. I don't know why they keep giving me weapons and animals. I don't know what's all about. But in this show, it was fun because I was playing a female character, but the female character was disguised as a soldier, as a man. But at the end of the show, I rip off the hat and the wig and my hair comes down like a Breck girl. And I'm like, ha ha ha, I was a woman the whole time. Again, as you do in opera. This was a recent fun moment. I got back out to Santa Fe, my very first gig. Back in 2006, I got back out to Santa Fe to work with the Desert Chorale again a couple of years ago. And we got to perform at the Santa Fe Opera House. This is what it is. And it is an outdoor venue. I don't know if you can tell, but that's the desert back there. So this is the stage. And then you can see it's an open air auditorium. And we were called at the last minute to do a Game of Thrones live performance. And it was a very special one because, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name now. George Martin. Thanks, Mom. Anyway, he was there at that performance. It was a benefit performance for a local charity that he supports. But yeah, and the composer of the Game of Thrones music and the soundtrack he conducted, and it was the pyrotechnics and all these special effects on stage, and it was really incredible. Let's see if I can move on. Again, another little backstage moment. This is all the gear that I had on underneath this robe costume that we wore. So I had a little Madonna mic on one side, and then this wire is going up to my ear. I had a click track. Every single person on stage, including the entire orchestra, had a click track because we were playing to scenes that were projected on the screen behind us. But I had, you know, the wireless or the remote Madonna mic, and then the remote headset, and then just put it all under this like Von Trapp curtain robe that for some reason had palm trees. So there.
Wow.
So let's see, can I move to the next one? Come on, slide, you can do it. Yes. And then this is sort of back a few years. I took a tour to Germany as with my alma mater, with the Valparaiso University Chorale. I was with them as a soloist, and one of the stops we had was in Dresden, Germany. So this is one of the places I didn't get to sing in this venue. This is the Frauenkirche in Dresden. This is the inside, and then this is the outside behind the statue of Martin Luther. You can see the different colored bricks. And that shows the repairs from World War II.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really a powerful place to be. But they do these they do these organ services during the day, and so I can't remember where the organ console was, but you can see those ornate pipes up there. Just
beautiful.
Yeah, right. And good old Marty over here with the, you know, proclaiming the good news. And I had an opportunity one summer to study in Salzburg for a month or so, and we didn't get to perform here, but I wanted to share. I got to go to the theater from The Sound of Music, and I will tell you, the people in Salzburg, they do not know about Sound of Music, and they don't care. They're just like, wait, what?
No way.
Yeah, there are tons of tours everywhere, and they're like, yeah, I guess there's a thing, but it's like, it's not on their radar. It's just so funny.
Oh my.
I know, isn't that hilarious? Yeah. And this is with my group in Chicago. Last year, we did the Chicago premiere performance of Handel's very first oratorio that he wrote when he was 22 years old, and it was called The Triumph of Love and Disenchantment. And it was an allegory, and the characters were beauty, pleasure, time, and disenchantment. I was playing the role of pleasure. And this was with our orchestra, and this gentleman here is our artistic director, Ruben Dubrovsky. He is originally from Argentina, but has been based in Vienna, Austria for about 25 years. His wife is Austrian, and they met next to the Berlin Wall right after it was coming down in 1989. She's a violinist. They were in a youth orchestra together. And he asked her to take his picture with his friend in front of the wall, and then they've been together ever since. Isn't that sweet? Yeah. But this was a really wonderful performance that we had, and the group, I know I'm sort of talking long here. I'll try to wrap this up. No, Third Coast Baroque has a mission of sharing the aesthetics of Baroque music while unlocking its relevance for today's audiences. And essentially what that means is what I was talking about. We take a look at all the building blocks of Baroque music, of really what is at the essence of what makes up that music, what are the roots of the music. And we try to give it context for our audiences. You know, Ruben talks throughout the performance, and it really is in a dialogue with the audience during the show. And we also have, instead of doing pre-concert talks where you get a lecture, we have post-concert talkbacks. And so it's a time for the audience to engage in questions and conversation with the director, with the artist on stage, any specialists or scholars that apply to whatever repertoire that we're doing. And so we really engage with the audience and show how every single person, I guarantee you, every single person has a connection to the musical heritage of this music. We've been finding out that Baroque dances like the saraband originated in Africa, came over to the Americas, like Central and South America, during the slave trade. They mixed with colonial and tribal music there, traveled back across the ocean via Spain and into Western Europe, and then they show up in, you know, Bach cantatas. These were these folk dances and rhythms. The sarabanda in South America was actually, like, it was banned by the Catholic Church. It was kind of like the lambada of its day, right? And eventually it evolves into this thing where now it's in a sacred piece of music. Isn't that incredible? I mean, those kinds of connections just blow my mind. And that's the kind of detective work that we like to do as period musicians, as Baroque musicians. And so I'm really proud of the work that Third Coast Baroque has been doing. We're getting to the end of our 4th season, about to start our 5th season in September. And to give you a little preview, in September, our first concert series is called Generations. And we are looking at the music of J.S. Bach, but also the generation before and the generation after. And also seeing how that kind of perspective in terms of musical styles, and also Bach's music in particular, how it connects to the generations of Chicago jazz. And the families in Chicago, and the history of Chicago jazz, and the dynasties there of students and teachers and performers. And so we're really excited to collaborate with my friend Reggie Mobley, who's another countertenor, and just his voice is out of this world. And he's a Bach specialist. He'll be joining us. And we're going to be collaborating with an up-and-coming jazz trio in Chicago led by Isaiah Collier, a young man who I've gotten to know and hear, and he's unbelievable, just unbelievable. So we're really excited about that. Then in February of next year, we're remounting our very first program, the Sarabanda program, where we will be performing the works of Gaspar Fernandez, who is a lesser known Baroque composer, but he was a contemporary of Claudio Monteverdi. And Monteverdi just recently celebrated his 450th birthday a couple of years ago. But Fernandez was originally from Portugal, and then he moved to Mexico, and he was a composer who was listening to all those different indigenous rhythms and music around, as well as the African slaves and tribes that were also singing and dancing around him. And you can hear so many different influences, African, as well as Latin American, as well as Sephardic. I mean, it's just incredible. Everything he does sounds so different. And then we're wrapping up our main stage series in May of next year with international superstar Vivica Jeannot. She's a mezzo-soprano who joined us 2 years ago. And she is one of the fiercest singers I've ever seen. And she's so incredibly kind and generous. But her singing, my goodness, like I break a sweat just like listening to all the notes that she sings. But she's going to be bringing a program that's called Lucifera, or Lucifer, like the female Lucifer. Just essentially, it's looking at sort of the darker characters in Baroque music, both in Baroque operas and oratorios and stories and things like that, because sometimes they have really, really fun music. So the mission of Third Coast Baroque is to reframe early music and take a look at it through with fresh eyes, and look at it in context, not only the context it was in, but also looking at it in our context now, and why is it important? Why is it still important? I'm just really proud of everybody who has supported us over the years, and I know some of you from Chester have supported us in the past, and we really appreciate it. But I'm gonna move on to one final little share. This was some virtual music making done during the current pandemic. With my colleagues. At the top left here is Brandon Aker, and he's playing an instrument called the theorbo. I call it the super lute because it's like a lute that has an extra long neck. It's actually about 6 feet long. It's taller than he is, or about the same size as he is. And it's an incredible instrument. And then down here, you see my friend Anna. She's playing what looks like a cello, but it's actually called a viola da gamba. And that instrument it can have like 7 or 8 strings on it. And you can see she's playing the bow underhanded. You'll also be able to see she's holding it. She's cradling it between her legs. There's no end pin propping it up like a modern cello. And this is our fearless leader, our artistic director down here on the bottom right. His name is Ruben Dubrovsky, and he's playing an instrument called the coloscione. It's an Italian name. And it's essentially a bass lute. It's tuned like a bass guitar. It's got 4 strings like a bass guitar. So, you know, Paul McCartney could have played this thing and rocked out with, you know, another string band. I don't know. And then I'm sitting here in my office singing stuff. So I'll let this play for a little bit. I won't play the whole thing because it's really long, but Tammy has all the links. So if you want to hear complete performances of anything that I shared, she's going to share that with you when she posts the recording. I'm gonna stop there.
Angie, wow. I get lost in your beautiful voice. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was wonderful.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure. Like I said, I could yap on and on and on, so you got to stop me.